Welcome to Grow with Purpose. This is the Axiom podcast where we talk about the issues that business owners face every week in our work with clients in the field. And we invite some of those business owners on the podcast. We also invite subject matter experts. Today, we have one and the same. We have a business owner and a subject matter expert. And I'll let Mitch introduce himself. And I'll just say, Mitch, everybody I've ever introduced you to comes away saying thank you. So that's a pretty big compliment.
Where were you when I met my wife?
Well, yeah, if only we would have had that opportunity. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself, what you do on a day in, day out basis, and a little bit more about Mitch.
Thanks, Joey. I have such a high regard for your team. Jazzed to be here, literally jumping up and down. I think the several interactions we had before this time.
You were excited to get on the podcast.
I was very excited, yeah. And so I have a neat role. I get to work with individuals across the board. Sometimes it's one-to-one. Sometimes it's in a team setting, or I'm going up and doing a keynote and presentation. And a lot of what I focus on, and lately what I've been doing more posting about too, is on the communication skills. Mm-hmm. So presentation skills, how we connect and communicate with our team. Maybe they have different wiring, different motivators. And lately that has come about a lot of times when it comes to your own executive presence, when it comes to resolving conflict, and when it comes a lot to in how we engage our team members and convey information in a manner that they understand, not the way we prefer to speak, and in a way that creates influence and elicits change. And so I get to do that across the board. It's a blast. I stay pretty local in Sarasota. I'll venture out to St. Pete, Tampa, maybe Orlando every now and then, but it's been a passion doing it primarily in our home community.
Yeah, and you have a pretty varied skill set. I might say you undersold yourself a little bit in that because I first got to know you when you're in the performance coaching space, which you still do.
Yep, definitely.
You've worked with several of our clients to great effect.
Yeah.
And but the communication side is one of the things that I did want to talk to you about because when we talk about communication, it's kind of small types of communication where it might be leading a team meeting of just 4 or 5 people. It could be very small, where it's like one-to-one. But it could also be like an all-hands meeting to 200 people. And the CEOs that a lot of our kind of the prototypical client, it's going to be somebody who has been very effective at growing an organization, and they've had to communicate, obviously, right? They've had to interact with other people. It's way bigger than they could have ever accomplished on their own. But communication is one of those things that if we ever do a culture survey, which we do with every new client, and what does every culture survey say is the number one issue in the organization? I've never seen anything else at the top of the list, right? It's always communication, right? We could do better at communication. So they're all aware of it, but it seems like this kind of fuzzy, nebulous thing. I know we need to get better at it as an organization. That probably means that I need to get better at it as a CEO. But do I take a Toastmasters course? Is that even a thing anymore? That's how, I grew up in Toastmasters, so that was very effective. But do I need to be an empathetic listener? Do I need to go take some stuff on emotional intelligence? Right? Probably all of the above would help. But as you think about the roles that CEOs play in communicating, everything from one-to-one, performance feedback to all company hands, this is our vision for the organization. What have you seen CEOs in particular struggle with frequently when it comes to communication?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as you're walking through that, there's a two-pronged response. I think one focuses on the method and the systems of communication, and the other actually the technique.
Okay.
Oftentimes, if I see in any organization communication is an issue, and we unpack that, often what we discover is that things were emailed when they should have been verbally communicated. There were phone calls when they should have been in-person meetings. There was teams or text messages that should have never occurred in the first place. And so not having clear protocols in place for each method and modem of communication oftentimes bites leaders in the foot. And part of the reason for that is when we look at communication and the full message that's being expressed. I work this with clients and I speak on it all the time. It's that if you and I are sitting across from each other, how we are now, I see you, you see me, we're able to communicate and convey a message with the full 100% picture. Mm-hmm. If I were to take out just our body language and you could only hear the sound of my voice and what comprises of it, the pitch, the cadence, the tone, all of those things, that makes about 45% of the message. So just by cutting out visually what you see and only listening to the words that I say and how I say it, your message goes down to 45%. Now, if I were to get rid of the tone, I would get rid of the pitch and the cadence. How do I do that? Email, text, Teams, just short form messaging in written word, 7%. And so if I communicate something with only 7% of the message coming across, and our brains require 100% of the data, then what happens is you fill in the rest. And so I can say to you, hey, you look great today. And if you've just had a terrible day, you spilled coffee on yourself, you got cut off on the way from work, somebody maybe made a gesture to you you weren't fond of, and then you get that text, you might, and you don't know me super well, and you're maybe a little insecure about your outfit, you might take that negatively. And all I did was mean as a compliment. Versus I say, you look great today, and you think, oh, that's a wonderful thing. Or I'm making a pass at you. And so all of a sudden, you take this one simple compliment statement and gets misconstrued or misportrayed because the other person is filling in the remainder of the message.
But what if I use emojis? Is that enough to make up for the 90% gap?
Man, if you... each generation views emojis differently. And so when you look at generational studies, I haven't done, this would be a neat to look at how each generation truly portrays it. But my 92-year-old grandmother is using the same emojis that you get to text messages you typically don't respond to. She's getting the kissy emoji, the wink, the red lipstick.
I get the same ones, except I get like 6 kiss emojis and 6 red lipsticks. You know,
and so
but I have a Latin mother-in-law, so that explains the repetition.
Right now, if you were to send that to anybody else, right? And so I think emojis, they can help at times, but also, depending if the generation grew up with emojis, they're learning emojis, or it's something completely foreign, they mean different things depending on the person.
Well, I'm saying it in jest, but it goes to the medium, right? So Neil Postman wrote a great book back in the 80s, I think, called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he talks about the medium becomes the message. So he's talking primarily about news and the news cycle. And we went from a literary society where presidential candidates like Abe Lincoln could get up and give a stump speech that was 3 to 4 hours long, and people could follow the argument all the way through. And now we've gone to these more bite-sized pieces of, you know, Postman, when he wrote that book, he was talking about like 60 minutes that would break news up into 20-minute segments. And he was apoplectic about that. You know, what would he think about Twitter, you know, or where it's like, 100 and something characters. So what you're saying reminds me of that, in that the medium, you know, it's interesting when I get a text message, it automatically falls into like one of 2 or 3 categories. Like, oh, this is my family checking up on me. This is a client with a 5-alarm fire. You know, so it's like it's these 2 extremes, and it's almost like your brain becomes incapable after a while of even saying, well, there could be a 3rd or a 4th bucket. I just have to throw it in, and then it's almost like this instinctual response you have. So when you you said protocols, right? Which, you know, to consultants like us, that kind of warms our heart. You know, it's like systems, processes, protocols, frameworks. So what does that look like in practice? Like if somebody said, okay, Mitch, I get it. We need protocols that talk about which medium needs to be used for which kind of message. Is that we sit around the table and say, okay, we're not going to text each other anymore unless it's this kind of thing? Or like, what have you seen work for companies?
I think oftentimes, the stat is 85% of individuals have experienced workplace conflict. So it's apparent all the time. And looking at, if we as a team can dissect and assess what were those areas of conflict and work backwards to see what was the communication that originally had, and use the most practical examples of when those things occur. And the thing that I kind of hit over the head is, as silly as it sounds, as dumb as it may be, getting a bunch of people around the room and saying, okay, if you have to provide critical feedback, walk to the person's office, don't put that in an email. Using those examples is critical, because if I'm working one-to-one with an individual, each person has their own communication tendency and their baseline of comfort. So for me personally, I like to have head up in the sky. I want to go, go, go. I don't want to slow down and put my words into a written format. So what that means is oftentimes if I have something I need, I'm much more likely to pick up the phone and call somebody than I am to just sit down and jot them a text. If I have to get my thoughts out, I'm verbally dictating into my phone. And that's an extreme tendency. On the other side, you have an extreme tendency of leaders, especially those that are more analytical and detail oriented. They want everything in writing. Why are you interrupting my workflow? Let me just send this to you in an email. And then you have these emails that start drawing out and drawing out. Well, to be honest, when I receive that, you're lucky if I read the whole thing. Yeah. But then what happens is you send that information that can be very easily misconstrued, and they're punctual, poignant, clear, and direct formal language with someone who's highly relational can often lead to a lot of misinterpretation. And so if I'm sitting leaders down, I share those percentages, and I look at the different typical types of communication. Text messaging is great for just check-ins, where are you at? When it comes to email, that's wonderful for follow-up. If you've got a lot of information, data-heavy things to pass along, send it via email. As soon as things become potentially misconstrued or there's room for interpretation, you might need to call somebody up for sales and see how they're doing. I don't like the check-ins a month later on a text because their response gives me no information. I want to hear their tone and their pitch to know, are you still interested, or has something else come up? If I'm working internally with team members, if I need to know what their baseline is, how they came into this day, where are they at before I start delivering potentially difficult conversations. And so all the way down to performance reviews and having to need to resolve and mediate different issues, I want people in person in my office. If we can't do that, we're going to do it virtually on Teams or Zoom. But looking at just, I would say, qualifying what are those different tiers of messaging, and based on those tiers, assign, it's not overly complicated, but assign what the direct channel of communication is. Then when a leader misses it, because they will, you go back and you reference and seek to gain clarity as to why they didn't do it. I think you'll be surprised to find out that they didn't realize that they crossed that channel, and what they perceived as something that might have been very safe to communicate via email, they didn't realize the severity or the potential severity of messaging that way.
Yeah. I like your approach of getting with the team and saying, what were some of the most recent conflicts we had? Yeah. Because you're kind of applying that 80-20 rule. Like, you can probably cover 80% of the issues by focusing on the 20% of the times we had a conflict that went down.
Yeah.
So you find that to be, good. The crucible of conflict is a good place to mine for where we're missing, where the obvious places we should have some process or some understanding in place about what's the best way to communicate certain types of information. When you're talking, I also, was kind of tuned into the fact that it's not just the medium that you have to pay attention to, it's the person, which sounds obvious.
Right.
But when you think about who's going to be receiving this message, like, I know that you said it, so I can say it, right? If I've got something to convey to Mitch, call him.
Yeah.
He's going to, it's probably going to be the happiest phone call I've had all day. I'm going to feel great because somebody was excited to pick up the phone. But we're also going to be able to cover a lot of ground pretty quickly, even if it was a small topic.
Yeah.
Right. So we were talking about this podcast. We saw each other the other day, and it was just very easy for me to say, hey, here's some of the things I'd like to pick your brain on. And you said, oh, I could go this direction, I could go that direction. Made me feel better about the conversation.
Yeah.
Could I have done that in an email? Yes. But that was a case where, given the person I was sending it to, I was like, I think I would get more out of this. And maybe that's one of the ways to think about it too, is we always kind of can tend to default to self-interest when we're stressed and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like, well, what's going to be most helpful for me in preparing for this conversation with Mitch? Probably a conversation with Mitch.
Yeah.
Whereas if I was talking to, I could think of, a couple of our CEOs that if I wanted to have them on a podcast, I would probably need to send them 3 or 4 bullets.
Yep.
Because they're going to forget the conversation in the week or two that it takes to get here.
Yeah.
And they're also just maybe a little bit more nervous about being in front of a camera or a microphone. And so they need to have things laid out a little bit more.
Yep.
So when you're talking to people about, let's say you've got the team, you've covered a few recent conflicts. Now there's a good common language about the kinds of things that we're not going to do in email or text, things that are going to need conversation. Do you work with them at all in considering that other side of the microphone, so to speak, or
Yeah.
the text message? And like, how does that play into your development of them and their communication style?
Absolutely. And it's what helps them to create understanding, and as a result, once they have that understanding of the way that other person operates and their wiring, they're not doing it out of obligation anymore. So if I don't understand the person I'm communicating to and what resonates to them, what's important to them, and how to achieve a common task faster together, if I don't understand those things, all I get from my vantage point is I'm doing things that I prefer not to do, and I'm communicating in a way that makes me uncomfortable. And so we spend, I would say, majority of the time, a little bit about yourself, but then the majority of time looking at those other leaders and those individuals that you're communicating with, so that you can better understand why you need to communicate that way, what it means to them. And as a result, now you're doing it out of a get to, not a have to. And so practically, there's a couple of telltale signs when you look for different types of leadership styles. Your typical type A leader, right? The go, 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 time is of the absolute essence. When you're communicating with them, you often want to create the most brevity in communication and think about how do I circumvent the back and forth. So the fastest way to irritate that type of individual is start texting back and forth and draw out a 2-minute conversation for 30 minutes, right? When I think about and then on the flip side, being mindful to not take things personally when that person communicates with you, because it's often short form, very direct, whether it's verbal or it's in messaging. On the flip side of that, you have your highly relational individual. That person, that leader, oftentimes is going to want to spend much more time. They're more likely to do one-to-one meetings and draw them out when that meeting probably wouldn't have been necessary. But for them, their value motivators in the relationships, having harmony with the team, hearing your personal life. And if they can hear your personal life and what's going on, they feel like you're engaged, you're motivated, and we're working on the same team. And so some individuals actually need more breadth in communication, and they need more time invested. You've got people that are extremely detail-oriented. You see that because their emails are thorough. And when you're talking with those individuals, they don't like to be caught off guard. And so when I have team meetings, there's some that I will prep in advance in writing. Here's the agenda. Here's what we're going over. Do you have any questions? I want to get as much information in writing so they always can reference it, so they're not caught off guard, and to give them the prep time to formulate those thoughts. So sometimes it's just looking, is that leader highly relational? And do they tend to, if you want to engage them and move, do they need to talk and work on the relational component first and then get through on the business side of things? Are your leaders very detail oriented, and are they going to appreciate the advance notice and heavy written information? And are they really more, how do I get from A to B as absolutely fast as possible? And how do I create more brevity in my communication and being mindful of doing the typing entrapment of going back and forth?
So when I think about CEOs, they kind of always universally seem to be constrained for time. Right? One of the frustrations that they will voice to us is, I've got this person on the team and every meeting seems to take an hour and a half. Yeah. And it's not that I don't want to give it to them. It's just hard. I don't have an hour and a half every time.
Yeah.
Every time there's a 20-minute conversation to take care of something in the business, I don't have an extra, 60, 70 minutes to give that person. How do you coach them? Like, how should they handle that situation? What are some things that they can do to honor the person and not send a message that the relationship isn't important, but at the same time be able to, move through all the things that are on their list that day?
There's this saying, I love it, I might butcher it, but it's, you can't be that person for everyone, but someone can be that person for everyone. I think I got it right. Is that it?
It sounds good.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. We'll stick with it. So I think part of that, and I think it's falling back to what's your baseline of a leader. If you're that relational leader that's very heartfelt and it's about you, then it's a personal growth opportunity. If you're a leader that's kind of cut and dry and trying to get from A to B as fast as possible, then it's about how do I convey that to my very relational team. So depending on where your baseline is, the response changes. On the highly relational leader, it's walking through the understanding that there's some people that actually get more tense and worked up, and it isn't to their benefit but to their detriment to have those long drawn out relational meetings. And so we walk through that and understanding that it's actually not necessarily serving them. And typically for that type of wiring, their value system, when they realize they're not serving their team by drawing out meetings when they're highly relational, something clicks and they start to shift. But it's hard for them. On the flip side, when you're working with your team members that are very driven, A to B, how do I get there as fast as possible? And I have these meetings after meetings after meetings that are extremely drawn out. One, are you meeting with the people that you should be meeting with? Or should there be somebody else there? Two, is it your role to be that relational person for them? And that's where I think about one person, you can't be that for everyone, but someone can. In that there's some individuals I have the bandwidth to make sure that I can really pour into and on that relational side. And when I don't, my job and my responsibility as a leader is to ensure that somebody is doing that for them. So part of, if they can't get it from me, they've got to get it from somebody else. And then some practical things that I work at and look at, I love when I go into a meeting, is setting the guardrails. So we're going to adjust depending on what the meeting culture has been. And we're going to change the precedent to say, maybe we're going to do, I think Michael Corley said, do 45-minute meetings. Why do you need an hour? So let's do a 45-minute meeting. I'm going to set the guardrails in the beginning and say, listen, I value your time. And there might be some things that we may really get drawn into and talk more about, but I want to make sure that we stick to these guardrails. And so you tee that up in the beginning verbally. So when you're 30 minutes in or 15 minutes in and we've sidetracked and we're talking about the children and we're talking about the dogs and what we did, you have that reference point back to say, we're about 15. Hey, I just want to make sure we've only got 45 minutes. I want to make sure we can keep the meeting moving along. When you set the guardrails in the beginning, it becomes less personal, like you're trying to find a way to interrupt when they're storytelling about something very meaningful to them, and it's a callback to something two people mutually agreed on. Makes it way easier.
That's good. I think as I play back through some of these situations that I've witnessed, I think one of the things that we could have done better is when that person came in the room, or before we asked them to come down, say, hey, we've got 20 minutes. We'd really like you to come down and speak about X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And that way, if they just come down, they're like, hey, I was invited down to the CEO's office. Can't wait. And they're highly relational.
Relational, do hour and a half, 2-hour meetings. I had somebody come up to me and asked me, so are you going to meet with them for an hour, 2 hours? I respond, I didn't know we meet for 2 hours. I didn't know that existed. I thought hour and we can get it in 30, maybe 15.
So sometimes just like you said, setting the guardrail, setting the expectation can help you. And then, but it's funny because there's also situations where we've set the guardrail and the person sits down and the CEO goes, oh, I forgot to ask, how's your mom doing with that surgery she had, last month? And, how's your dad been? And you're like, we're 5 minutes into our 15 minutes that we have before we have to move on to the next thing. So it's, holding yourself accountable to the
And what I would say to that individual and that CEO is, don't bring up something that you can't give the justice to. So if I have 15 minutes and I'm asking about how your mom's doing and she's going through an ailment, I'm not serving you, the person, her mom, the conversation. If I've got a 5-minute crush window, I cannot give you the time needed and invested to flush that conversation out fully. And so I think make sure if you're going to bring things up that are on a personal front, make sure you do it in a manner where you can do it justice and give the person room. If they start tearing up, if they've got a lot going on, the last thing you want to do is, in your mind, panicking because you brought something up and now you're trying to figure out a way to end the conversation. And this person is trying to be vulnerable and transparent with you.
Well, when you think about the dynamics of a team, like what you said, are you the best person to be providing that kind of relational dynamic? And think about, there's all these dynamic duos throughout business history, whether it's Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger or, whomever, where like one was very clearly gifted in this area, the other was very clearly gifted in the other, and they were able to even each other out. And I think a lot of times CEOs get pulled into that relational role because they don't have a number two, or general manager, operations manager, another, partner who sees that as their sweet spot, right? And so like, well, I got to do it all. So what do you tell the person who feels like they've got to do it all because there's literally nobody else in the building that they feel like can do it?
what do you tell the person who feels like they can do it all? I mean, let's point to anything in their life and go, here's exhibit A. Is it working? I mean, if we let's look at your financials. Let's look at the motivation of your team. Let's look at your personal life. How's your marriage doing? Let's look at any facet of your life when you've got the do-it-all syndrome, and let's have an honest, hard conversation. Is it working?
I think they would say, I know it's not working, but who else is going to do it? How do you challenge them to find the person? Because you and I know the person probably is there.
Yeah.
They just haven't been empowered to step into that role.
Yeah.
Is it as simple as challenging their...
It can be. It depends on their baseline and what is the root cause. Are they doing what is their underlying behavior? So when I look at performance coaching, a lot of times it's not looking at the symptom, but what's the underlying behavior. So are you not delegating and finding other people because you've got a scarcity mentality? You fear that it's got to be on you because every penny counts? Are you doing it because you've got lone wolf syndrome? Are you doing it because you think that other people can't do it as well as you can? Are you doing it for simply a fear of letting something go, and you've got to have that control piece? So there's a multitude of factors as to say, why aren't you beginning to let it go? And we can dissect each one of those, identify it, and then I would create some sort of accountability, make it painful, make it clear that they buy into, to say, if I don't get this done and make these steps in order to do this, what's at stake? And sometimes that can be a financial ping. Sometimes it's just walking through a reality of, let's walk down this road and see what happens for another 6 months, 12 months, 3 years. Do a vision casting on what status quo right now looks like if it's left unchecked.
Yeah. I think sometimes that is their highest and best use. Sometimes they are the relational guru that everybody looks to. It's the fact that they're getting pulled into financial discussions or operational discussions, and then you get to challenge them on, why are you not delegating these other areas? Clearly, this is not something that you enjoy particularly. You feel like you have to do it. And I like what you said about look at the underlying symptoms. They're going to tell you more about where that's coming from.
Right.
When you're talking with, let's say that you flip the script and somebody says, Mitch, I have this sales manager. He's fantastic. He's always hitting his numbers. But every time we get in a meeting, he just goes on and on and on. And it's almost like he doesn't know how to wind up his comments. And so he keeps waiting for somebody to interrupt him, but we're all too nice to do it. So could you work with him? Could you teach him how to be more brief and concise, or maybe be more attuned to the fact that he's kind of sucking all of the air out of the room?
So I'll do one session with him, and then I'll do one session with the team when we got it solved.
Okay.
One session with him to basically make sure he's got the awareness. And if he's got the awareness, to make sure that the response that we're going to do with session 2 with the team is going to be received favorably. So first thing, we're not working on him. We're just making sure he's got the awareness, and he's going to understand that what the team does is favorable. We're going to meet with the team. I'm going to ask them, who here loves interrupting people? Great. You're in charge. Every single time this person starts going on and on, you can do a buzzer, you can do a signal, you can just cut them off. Just train them the hard way so they can actually get the experience of what should be cut off. My session with them is to make sure their response is from a perspective of gratitude, because your team is coming around you to help you in doing something that you probably just don't have the awareness in.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. I like how the care for the person is at the center of that whole process.
Yeah.
That's great. Talk to me a second about, so kind of maybe stay on the same topic. We used to struggle to get teams to meet remotely, just because, for us traveling to the four corners of, 5 different counties, there's not enough hours in the day. So it's like, well, hey, if we do a video call, there's this thing called, back in the day, Skype, and then there was WebEx, and then Zoom, and we were like Zoom, like, hey, there's this great new tool called Zoom. Well, COVID fixed that for everybody, right? That became a non-issue. Everybody was familiar with it. But one of the things that we notice, there's a lot we could talk about in terms of Zoom etiquette. We'll probably save that for another whole podcast. There's a lot on there. But when we are face-to-face, when you and I are talking, even if we're on the phone, a little bit more difficult on the phone, But if there's a lapse in conversation, it's almost instantaneous. And we do this as we communicate back and forth. I'll pause, and that's your cue to pick up. We've been doing it this whole podcast. That's one of the reasons in studio works so well. But when you're on a video conference, there's just a little bit of latency. And so by the time I've paused, that seems like an eternity to you because it's added an extra half a second, right? That's all that's happened. It took me a half a second to hear your last comment, but you stopped talking. So that half a second's going for you. I do the polite pause for another half a second, right? Because I don't want to interrupt you. And now it's going on for a second. And you're like, oh my God, nobody's talking. I got to keep going.
Yeah.
What do you use? Like hand signals? Do you like, how do you, because I see this as pervasive on Zoom calls.
Yeah.
That the comments just continue to run on because there's that little bit of a gap that is a little bit impolite.
And my response on off the cuff is not for a broad, quick solution. It's a little bit more of a symptom that I see occurs in general with when I do public speaking coaching. Somebody came up to me after a keynote and, excuse me, they asked, how do I get more comfortable with silence? And I just stared at them and they kept talking. And it's like, and I, as soon as somebody comes, not a single word. I waited maybe a couple minutes until they awkwardly ran out of things to say and were just staring at me and I was staring at them. And then awkward, isn't it? Mm-hmm. They're like, yeah, that was terrible. And so I want sometimes, especially those with verbal fillers or who kind of increase the pace, part of what I look at is how do you get more comfortable with silence? And that's to work on that is more intensive. And so it's not a broad sense from a standpoint on virtual calls and what's a technique or how do I get better at it. But often what you'll occur is a normal conversation. I think everybody's got the word baseline we're using a lot today, and everyone's got a baseline of their comfort level of silence. The more extroverted you are, the more that shortens. The more introverted you are, the more comfortable you are with longer space. And typically what's occurring and what you're describing is now we're getting a little bit more out of out of the comfort zone for more people.
Yeah.
And how do you build that muscle? I had to build it. I had a client one time that was the most introverted person I'd ever met in my life. I had to make a game out of coaching with them. We did it virtually because I was just losing my mind. And this is kind of bad, but it worked and it taught the muscle. I would ask them what I think would be just this very amazing, thoughtful question that would make them self-reflect. So I'd position this question. And then I had my phone timer on right next to the computer and I'd click play, start. And the game for me was how long can I get this person to process and think before they uttered a response? I got that going. I clicked play. An entire minute. Literally, I'm staring at him. He's staring back at me. He'll look up, back at me. I didn't utter a word for an entire minute. Now, typically, if you can get comfortable with 2 seconds of silence,
you're good.
Right? Yeah. And so, but it's just starting to have that awareness and practice that muscle. The more extroverted you are, it's like screaming in your ears. It is very difficult, but as soon as you create awareness around it and you work it, you can become a master of it.
It's interesting. We talk internally about high-functioning teams. So we have some teams that we would say, wow, that is an 8 or a 9 out of 10 in terms of high-functioning team. And what we mean by that is it's a whole group of skills. It's conflict resolution, it's transparency, it's healthy debate, it's when we leave the room, we're all on the same page. Even if there was a lot of disagreement in here, we're going to leave it here. And those are fun teams to work with. And then we've got teams that are on the other end, and we're trying to coach individuals up and create some ground rules for the team and sometimes even invite them into one of those high-functioning teams so they can experience, because experiencing it is worth way more than describing it. Yeah. But it's funny, I wonder if there's be a great scientific study for a grad student somewhere of like, if you could measure the amount of pause and silence in one of those high-functioning team meetings and compare it to the mean of the amount of because those high-functioning groups, they do have the ability to let somebody make a statement or somebody say, I want everybody to think about this. Or have you thought about, I don't know that the data matches up with that. Have you thought about whether that's accurate or not? And the high functioning teams, you'll be able to measure not a minute, but a lot more than if it's a low functioning team, which sounds terrible, but that's kind of what it is. There's almost an immediate, you got to fill the space because somebody's going to feel the uncomfortable spotlight on them. Whereas a high functioning team, they're just much more able to reflect, to stare at a blank whiteboard, to look at a financial statement and actually process it. It's funny how silence is so uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. And you often have brilliant team members that take longer to process, but they're very high intelligence, and then you just need to give them the space. So in those team environments where it's the same 2 or 3 vocal people who can just speak off the cuff communicating, you're missing out on some of the most valuable input and data that you can have to make decisions. And I would fall that back on the leader who's facilitating. Part of your responsibility is to make sure every voice is heard. And so if I'm facilitating in a room, I'm mindful and I'm observing who are my processors and who are not speaking. And if they're not communicating, I will cut off my vocal individuals, and sometimes rather abruptly, because what'll happen is if they start a new communication thought and that person who is mid-thought formulating all of a sudden gets distracted, their thought resets, and I lost that gem that they were going to bring up. And so I'm watching, and it's like the computer's 70% loaded. And you're about to plug it up. I'm running to slap the plug out of your hand.
Yeah, I've been told, so facilitating for a new team, and the CEO will say, hey, well, it's usually the financial controller. Stereotypes are there for a reason, right? They're like, our controller, brilliant, but you're going to have to draw him into the conversation. He's probably going to hold back.
Yeah.
And it's funny, exactly what you said. And I'll tell them, I'm like, well, tell me who I need to shut up so that he has time to because I'm not going to be able to draw it out of him any faster. He's going to take, the reason you value his insight is because he lets the thought cook long enough to actually present it. So who's the person? And it's usually the sales manager.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
Well, you got to shut the sales manager up. Okay. So sometimes I probably don't interrupt as much as I should, but I'll preface the question with, hey, Don, I want to get your thought on this. Take 10, 15 seconds.
Yeah.
Think about what we just talked about. Everybody else, let's take a beat here.
Yeah.
And then just wait for Don.
That's great.
And then when you see Don get up out of his chair and pick up the whiteboard marker, that it's about to be worth every single penny because he's about to drop some wisdom on the group that they would have missed otherwise. Let's pivot for a second and let's talk about CEOs and what you might call like charisma or this ability to carry a message. When we work with a business, one of the things that we have to do before we can ever really start getting the work done is understand what is that person's vision for what we're all trying to accomplish together. And so the leader of that business is the vision carrier. Right? And so we'll do workshops and we'll try to get a vision statement down on paper. We'll try to get it a lot more concise and clear, all with the purpose of being able to communicate it. So we get to a point where they're very excited about it. We have it in a format that can get it out of my head and into your head and into every other head so we all know where we're going together. But the skill set, or you could call it skill set, you could call it discipline, you could call it the routine, the rhythm of communicating what we're about is something that some CEOs are really, really good at, almost natural. You might call those like the cheerleaders.
Yeah.
And then you've got the ones that, man, you just go, what you are about and the direction you're trying to go is so exciting. My biggest fear is not enough people are ever going to find out about it for us to get there.
Yeah.
How do you coach and work with somebody about being able to bring a message consistently in a way that can be heard, oftentimes for the group that we're talking about, in a way that just saps every ounce of energy out of them? Speaking at the all hands meeting is the last thing they want to do. Walking the halls is not their sweet spot.
Yeah. And so what I say to and work with those leaders, I have a client that's preparing. She's got a couple of talks that she needs to do. And we just finished. Each leader has a different prep style. So what I'm saying and how she preps is not the default, and that could be a whole other conversation, is how do you best prep for your style to present. For her, every word's written out. Her transcript is clean, finalized. Next stage for her is memorizing it. Once she has it memorized, that's where most people stop. Great, I remembered every word. When in the beginning of our time together, I mentioned there's 2 protocols. And that other protocol of where's one of the biggest hangups I see when CEOs come up and go to present and speak is that they focus on what they're going to say as the top priority, and that's what they panic about the most as well. But when we just work through those statistics, 7% of a message is the words that we say, 38% tone, pitch, and cadence, so that equals 45. Pretty sure that math is right. And then 55% is body language. So we just spent all that effort. I'm working with my client. We spent all that effort on the transcript, on memorizing it. We still only have 7% of the message done. So then we begin to work out, how are you going to deliver it? What are you going to do with your voice to engage and captivate the audience? What are you going to do with different body language gestures to ensure that that message lands? So practical step that I recommend, and it'll be a couple of different things. People listening can just choose 1 or 2. After you've got your message, so let's say you've got your mission vision that you want to communicate, maybe your values as well. Audio record yourself, and I want you to hear your voice. Does your voice sound exactly the same? So does it not vary in speed at all? This is what it sounds like when you don't vary your speed. Your voice continues to go. I'm going 20 miles per hour. I want to go sometimes 35 miles per hour. Sometimes I want to slow it down to 5 miles per hour. So you listen to the varying speed. Does my voice change in inflection? Think about going up and down like a sound wave. Do I bring my voice up and do I bring it back down? Do I enunciate when our vision is powerful? Do I put more force in those words? So speed, inflection, and then pausing. Do I have the same rote pausing? Or are there times where I vary it? There was a speaker I love to listen to. He's got great pausing, but one of his shortfalls is it's the same dramatic pause at the end of every sentence. So you look for that in the brain. The attention span, especially with all the things going on, it becomes to shorten. So every time you vary your speed, you vary your inflection, you change your pause, it just draws them more in. So you can audio record yourself, pick one thing, listen to it. With body language, there's a lot you can do. What I recommend is a simple gestures is get your chin up just a little bit when you're talking, and then just make sure your arms are open. There's a neat phenomenon where it's a cascade effect. You change one thing with your body language, and all of a sudden other things begin to fall into place. So I lift my chin up, my voice starts to change. All of a sudden I lift my chest a little bit. My feet might separate just a little bit, showing it's territorial display. It's taking up more space, signs of subliminal confidence. And so listen to how you use your voice, and then video record yourself and watch what your body language gestures. Are you closed off and is your head shrugged, or is your head a little bit elevated? Are you comfortable to open up your hands and your chest a little bit?
That's good. Talk about like the roaming the halls scenario. So it's not going to be on a stage with a podium with prepared notes, but I still need to be a better communicator when I'm out and about in my business. And that could be, coming into an office with 5 or 6 people. It could be walking through a warehouse where there's 20 people, or a parking lot with 30 service trucks that are getting packed up for the morning.
Yep.
How do you advise business owners to just be mindful of their communication in their day-to-day?
You're going to have to be okay with silence. So build that muscle.
That's good. I like that.
And then give the space for your message. Don't treat your message lightly and go passing the halls and mutter something and they just caught part of it, right? It's the same thing with how are you doing? It takes 2 how are you doings before you get to the real message. The first how are you doing gets their attention, makes them realize their boss is talking to them and they're just trying to understand what's happening. Am I in trouble? Second how are you doing? Now you've got their attention. So if you're starting to communicate your message, it's the same thing with speaking. If I'm walking up and I'm in a meeting and I go to stand up, I don't start talking until I am standing up where I need to be and I've made eye contact with people. But it's nerve-wracking because I have to get the confidence to be silent and to get there. But then with you're just roaming the halls, give the space for your message. Let them know you want to address them. You have something to share, get their attention, and then begin to deliver it that way you at least have the guarantee without having to go into all the body language techniques and all the voice techniques and all those things, which we can, but that way they're just focused on you. You have their attention for at least a few seconds.
Yeah, that's good. I was sitting in an office working with a couple of people one time, and the owner came in, and it's like the sentence started when they were 2 steps out of the office, right? And the last sentence finished when they were 2 steps out of the office.
I've had conversations with my wife. She goes inside the garage, comes back in, still having the same conversation.
And it's funny, this end of the CEO, one of the most genuine people I've ever met.
Yeah.
Right. But the message that was communicated was almost, I don't have time for this. So it left, the 3 of us kind of looked at each other with this kind of look of bewilderment, like, what was that? And it made such an impression. I stopped in his office on my way out, and I said, hey, I just want to kind of recap what just happened 30 minutes ago. And I said, you kind of started talking before you came in the door, and then you didn't finish talking until you're already 2 steps out the door. And we got what you said, but I think it left a little bit of a bad taste in the mouth. So you might want to go back and just, clear that up.
Yeah.
And he said, I said, are you just that busy? Do we need to get you an executive assistant? What's going on? He goes, no. He goes, I just know I'm not very good at that kind of stuff. He goes, I didn't even realize I was doing that. I knew that I had to let them know about this thing that was going to happen, that we talked about. It was about a lawsuit. They're going to have to go get deposed. And so he goes, we weren't looking forward to it. And I was nervous about how they're going to receive it. And so I was just, now that I think about it, I was probably just trying to get in there and out of there as fast as possible. Yeah. And it was a good learning point for me, because I'm like, how many times do I do stuff, do other people do things where, we're in this avenue of communication, we're so wrapped up in our own head. We're not even stopping to think about this. Like we talk about giving people goodwill a lot. Like, let's give them the gift of goodwill. Let's assume that they're going to receive the information well. Let's assume that they're going to be thankful that you let them know ahead of time. We're going to assume that they're in this with you, and maybe they might want to encourage you and tell you it's going to be okay before you walk out the door. If we gave them all those gifts, will we show up differently? And I think communication for me, especially, I'll speak, it's therapy with Mitch time.
We've got the couch laid down.
Yeah.
Take it.
So, some of it is just getting out of your own head.
Yeah.
To be able to communicate with other people in the space where they're at.
I hear all the time people say, I'm just not good at this, right? That leader said it. I'm not a good communicator. And we need to delineate between not liking something and not being good at it. Most people don't like it. That's the norm. It's the number one. Public speaking in any sense is the number one fear over death. Right? People hate it. But you take that fear or that lack of enjoyment and you translate that to skill, and then that becomes your self-fulfilling paradigm of I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this. So any opportunity to step up, before you embrace it, here's your counter, well, it's just not my skill set. If you're in any position of leadership, congratulations, it's now a job responsibility. So start with telling yourself you're good at communicating. Understand that you might not like it. I've met powerful speakers that hate it, but they embraced it. They found coaches, they got the technique, and they're amazing, and they still don't enjoy it. And so I think part of that is beginning to change the script of what we tell ourselves before we walk into a board meeting, before we walk into a person's office. And it just simply starts with, I'm a phenomenal communicator, and this person can't wait to hear what I have to say.
Maybe as we wrap up, I'd love to hear like a Mitch success story. Is there somebody you can think about that has kind of really turned a corner on this, and the person that you see today is maybe not virtually unrecognizable, but they've made a lot of progress in terms of their ability to communicate, and you've seen their effectiveness increase as a result of that?
So this was one of my first clients. And we're going to go relational a little bit too, because when I work one-on-one, we work on everything. I mean, it's their faith, it's their family, it's their relationships, their personal time management. I find oftentimes with leadership, what happens from 5:01 p.m. to 8:59 a.m., so not the 9 to 5, but what happens outside of that is what's going to impact by the most significance what occurs during the day. So I had one of my first clients we work with, and here's a start, young guy. I think he was in college when we started, and then while we were coaching together, started his first job. And he had, part of what our goals was that he wrote out is, I want to find my dream wife. I want to date somebody. I want to get married. And I said, only one problem with that. You're afraid to talk to strangers.
This could be a problem.
This could be a problem. So, do you know the person you want to marry now? No? Okay. Well, we're going to have to get over this fear. So how we started was, I want you to go up to a stranger, and I want you to tell him hi, and then I want you to run away.
This was your homework assignment?
That was his homework assignment.
Oh, wow.
So he went up to us. So next week, did you do it? No, I got scared. So we created some accountability, some financial recourse if it didn't happen.
All right.
Met back. Yeah, I did it. Great. How did they respond? I don't know. I ran away, and I didn't look back. I just, hi, gone. Said, okay, level 2. You ready for it? I want you to say hi, introduce yourself, ask for their name.
And then run away?
And then pretty much, then run away. So we worked that way up. We had to work through, a lot of people have look-good programs or fear of what other people think of them. Mm-hmm. So we went through, and this is very unconventional coaching. I've only done it with him. This is not some framework I've developed, so please note, no judging here. I told him, I hope he listens to this podcast because he will know, because this is literally the only person I work with. I said, okay, so you have an issue with what people think about you. I want you to go to a restaurant, and I want you to order a cheeseburger, and I want you to look the waiter directly in the eyes and say, but instead of the buns, I want burgers for buns, and I want the bun inside. So he has burger, condiments, bun, burger on the outside. And then I want you to sit there and eat that burger while you're in the restaurant. And he did it. He ate the whole thing. So we just went through these exercises to stretch him, creating the awareness that really your fear is unwarranted. It's way over the top. And we created these humorous, fun, but quite difficult, very unconventional, I don't do it with most of my clients, environments. And so he began to work on these skills. He went to some different trainings. And I remember hearing the day before his wedding on the rehearsal dinner, he stood up and conveyed a message in front of his family, his wife's family, friends and loved ones. And the poise, the confidence, the way he articulated in front of these people, I was blown away. The language, the emphasis. And I've seen him in his corporate track. He's grown rapidly through his corporate track. And he gets quite often, to my understanding, complimented because of his speaking skills. So here's a person afraid of strangers, afraid of what other people think of them, to, man, you put him up against any typical CEO leader type, and he's knocking it out of the park.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody in the audience is interested in getting in contact with you or wants to learn more about you, where can they go?
LinkedIn. I'm there. It's my only social media. It's one platform, Mitch. That's what I'm on. So connect with me on LinkedIn. It might say follow. I'll connect with you back. Shoot me a message. That's favorite platform of choice. Happy to share my contact info through that. But
awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we'll put Mitch's LinkedIn handle in the show notes. They'll go in the leadership guide, actually. You can get to the leadership guide through the show notes, and that's where our team is going to take this episode and they break it down. They listen to it fresh, and they'll build some essentially worksheets, like 2 to 3 pages of takeaways and questions that you can ask yourself to kind of reflect on what is your communication ability, where do you need to get stronger, what are you struggling with, and maybe some chat, maybe a fancy homework assignment, like ordering a burger with the bun in the middle.
Send me a message. I'll give you a custom one. Let's have some fun.
Thanks, Mitch. This has been a lot of
Joey,
fun.
thank you so much for having me. Shout out to my man Cameron. Just had to throw him out there. I'm a fan and grateful. I recommend your team highly, everything that you all do. So it's a privilege to be here.
Thank you.